Has this ever happened to you? You're sketching the beginning of your drawing, but as you progress, you realize what you're drawing won't fit within your work area the way you want. How do you fix this? If you answered, use the Move tool to slide it over, or the Transform tool to scale it down a bit, then you're a digital artist. If you said, erase it and start over, or guess that's what I'm working with now, you're a traditional artist. Digital artists, my friends, my compatriots, I have some news for us. We have it easy. And because we have it so easy, it's making us learn less. For years, we relied on the infinite ability to resize, reshape, or reposition our work with a couple of taps. It's made us complacent to the problems traditional artists face, and as a result, it's made us less intentional with our art. Let's go back to the I drew this in the wrong spot example. It's a simple problem, but it's indicative of a core concept that digital artists often lack: the ability to think deeply about a composition from moment one. When you're a digital artist, you can shape, reshape, and rework a composition all the way up to the final moments. When you're a traditional artist, you inevitably hit a point of no take-backsies where, if you suddenly realize you're unhappy with a pose or the placement of something, it's going to take a lot of work to fix it, if you even can. Because of this, traditional artists spend more time at the beginning thinking about composition, the size of things, and their placement in the overall piece. They have to, because if they discover halfway through that something is wrong, there's a good chance that everything they just did is now wasted effort. Digital artists, on the other hand, can easily rework just the parts they want to fix, and can make huge changes to their work in seconds, where a traditional artist may have to spend hours redoing the piece. And I think this ease of change has made us lazy. And not the good lazy that comes from refining your process down to an easy workflow so you can make pieces faster and more efficiently. I'm talking the bad lazy, where you disconnect with your own art because you're not thinking about it as deeply as a traditional artist would. You subconsciously devalue the weight of your choices because they're so easy to undo. But what if that changed? What if you shut off your computer and picked up pencil and paper for a bit? How much can you really learn from taking the time to do art traditionally? And what impacts could it really have on your digital work? Well, this is my story about how getting back into traditional art changed the way I view my digital art. Maybe you'll learn something from it, maybe you'll try it yourself based on what I say here. Maybe, just maybe, you'll have an epiphany of your own that will improve your skills. It's no secret that I've been painting lately. It's the end cap of every newsletter, after all. But funny enough, it's not painting that made me stop and think about traditional artist mentalities versus digital artist mentalities. Instead, it's been my secret other practice hobby that made me think about it. Lately, I've been getting back into colored pencils. And by getting back into, I mean after sitting on a stash of mostly unused colored pencils for over a decade, I've decided to start using them again. It started as a way to use the leftover cardstock I was getting as a result of framing my paintings. Because, other side project incoming, I've also been framing my paintings and putting them on the wall. I couldn't find any frames that I really liked for cheap, so I decided to make my own out of cardstock. They've been turning out pretty good. To make the black frame around each painting, I've been cutting a rectangle of black cardstock, then cutting a smaller rectangle out of it to make the frame. Yes, I know I can just cut strips and glue them together to make a frame in a less paper-consuming way, but I like the solid look doing it this way gets me. That left me with some black rectangles of cardstock that are about 6 3/4 by 4 3/4 inches in size. I knew I wanted to do something with them to justify my building method. Then it hit me. You know what looks really cool? Colorful drawings on black paper. And hey, I have some colored pencils in the bowels of my art cubby. I can make something. And that's what started me on a small hobby to fill in these sheets of black cardstock with pretty colored pencil drawings. So far, they've turned out quite nicely. They've begun filling in the spaces between my hanging paintings. I hope to fill the wall eventually with a collage of weekly paintings and colored pencil drawings. Since I picked up this hobby, however, I've noticed a change taking place in my understanding of art. I'll demonstrate that by taking you through the first two pieces I made. For my very first drawing, I was completely thoughtless about its position on the page. Makes sense. I mean, I wasn't entirely sure yet if I planned to fill the page with drawings or if I wanted to cut it out and get fancy with it. I didn't know. This was more of a test run. I chose to make a Gerbera daisy because at the time of making this piece, I was in the headspace once again of trying to design the alchemist's mask. I decided the mask had an accent piece based on the petals of this flower. For my very first attempt at using colored pencils since college, this one turned out pretty decently. It reinforced some concepts I knew but wasn't necessarily following in my digital art. Namely, that when you're working with physical mediums, the direction of your stroke while coloring really matters. In digital art, it's easy to slap down a smooth blot of color with no indication of the direction of the tool that made it. Flat, expressionless colors are typical when laying down base colors. Here though, I had to be very careful about my stroke direction from the very beginning. Those stroke marks are very visible, especially if you're pressing hard while coloring. In fact, they're often what create the texture and color variance that makes colored pencil drawing so distinct. On top of that, when you're working with colored pencils, you can only layer so much before your work starts to get muddy. In digital art, you have an infinite number of layers that can cover layers below them an infinite number of ways. You have room to simply cover up whatever you don't want. Here though, if I realized too late that I didn't like where my work was going, it may be too difficult to turn the piece around. Take a look at my next piece for an example of this limitation. With my mind in the vein of the alchemist mask, I decided the next flower would be a daffodil, another component of the mask design I'd been working on. Here, I ran into two problems. Problem number 1. How to make something appear bright yellow when your base layer is black. There's a reason artists, both traditional and digital, like a good mid-tone background when coloring things. It helps you see the true color of something better when it's not sitting on top of an unrealistically white or black background. True black and white rarely occur in nature. Midtones let your eyes see colors for what they are relative to a realistic surrounding tone. However, again, even if you did design on top of a black background in digital, it only takes one layer to completely cover that black background with whatever color you want. Oh, and you're also not limited to your color options, because you have literally every single color available to you at any given moment in the color wheel. For me though, I had 48 colored pencils to choose from, and only 2 of them were anywhere near close to the colors I wanted and needed. And I still had that black background to contend with. As you can see from the final product, I hadn't quite figured out the right solution to this problem before it was too late. The resulting product is a lot darker than I would have liked, and that's because I failed to overcome the darkness of the paper bleeding through, no matter how many layers of yellow I tried to press onto it. Now that I have more experience, I realize I should have laid down a base of white before I got too deep into using my yellows. But since I didn't, no amount of white layering on top was ever able to overcome that dark base. Unfortunately, when it comes to the white colored pencil, it's very difficult for it to leave a truly white mark behind on top of other layers of colored pencils. Instead, it tends to either lighten or blend the colors. But I'd made another mistake that contributed to the overall darkness of what should have been a bright yellow daffodil, overcompensating with other colors. Like I said, I only had 2 good colors that were anywhere near the tones I wanted. At my experience level, I was never going to achieve clarity in my image with only 2 rather similar shades of yellow. I needed to throw in other colors to add some visual depth. Unfortunately, I went too hard in that direction. I brought in oranges and even browns in an attempt to add some color variety and depth to my picture. All I got was a daffodil that looks like it's about a day away from withering. This was my fault. My digital artist brain could not comprehend the basics of how to layer colors in a way to add shading and nuance to a piece. And why would it when every color under the sun is available with a click on the color wheel? I didn't know how to build color, and that resulted in issues with my final piece. If I had been making these in my art program of choice, they'd be clean, colorful, and exactly what I wanted them to be. I'd also have an infinite number of tries and tweaks to get them there. Not here, however. This is the real world with real world consequences for my lack of understanding. However, at this point in the process, I had no way to understand what my problems were. I just knew something wasn't clicking. I didn't hate my results, mind you. I still think they look pretty decent considering the circumstances. But I had more to learn. Next up, I shifted away from flowers and moved on to snails. Snail shells, to be specific. I've been toying with the idea of adding snail features to the mask. So I picked the burgundy snail as a reference and went at drawing its shell. There's a section of the final product that I think looks really good. It's an excellent display of how stroke direction and curved lines can add texture and depth to a piece. There are other parts where my lack of refinement in drawing spirals and curves really bit me. But I was beginning to figure something out. I was beginning to see how layering my colors could get me the look I wanted. I saw how smartly adding accents of yellows and purples could bring out the reds and browns of the shell. I saw how a bit of elbow grease and adding highlights on top could make brighter colors pop out at darker pieces. I was learning, but I hadn't quite nailed the lesson just yet. When all was said and done, I had 3 seemingly disparate drawings on one page. No longer content with the idea of cutting the paper up, especially since all 3 elements related back to the same character, I decided what it really needed was something to tie the 3 together. To the internet I went, in search of a final element that could represent the alchemist character. I found eucalyptus, which I learned comes from the Greek kalyptos, meaning covered. Plus, eucalyptus has medicinal uses. Eucalyptus for an alchemist who covers himself up when he leaves the house? It was perfect. The final result looks pretty good. I had definitely improved my color choices to end up with leaves that were closer to the proper color of eucalyptus, despite not having the exact colors I needed. However, there is one stain to the final result. Once again, something that a digital artist can fix in a snap, but I could not fix it here. Notice how the overall piece is very left-leaning. Leaves even fall off the edge of the left in less than pleasing ways. Meanwhile, on the right, there's some solid open space. In digital, I could shift this whole composition over and center it exactly how I want it. I can't do that here. This happened because I didn't think about my composition beforehand. I mean, I can't be too hard on myself here. I didn't have a composition when I started. I didn't intend for this whole page to become about one character. But it did, and my haphazard decisions at the start made me pay for them at the end. Now, I did lay down pencil sketches to help me make these. I knew before I started coloring that my leaves would fall off the edge. In hindsight, I should have spent a little more time refining my sketch, but I knew if I simply moved the eucalyptus branch over, that parts of it would be unattractively covered by the pieces on top. I was stuck between wanting to show off the leaves and not having actually left myself much room to do so. That was my bad. I'm still happy with the overall piece, but I undeniably wish I could shift it to the right and correct the mistakes I made along the way. Mistakes that, unfortunately, I did not learn my lesson from by the second piece. Which I should actually feel a tad ashamed of, because I was thinking about composition now, and even sketched most of it before starting, and yet, it's still left-leaning. I squished the feathers a bit to make sure they didn't just barely fall off the paper, which would have looked worse. But look at that gap on the right. Maybe this is a right-hand quirk. I think the only reason I didn't do it over was because I got lazy and didn't want to redraw everything. I was certainly missing the ease of a quick push over with the move tool by this point, but I persisted. I got the trickery done, and I was pretty happy with it. It shared a lot of similarities in making it to the daisy, so this was easy. Now that I was being more intentional with when I laid down colors, I was able to achieve a pretty good level of brightness. If anything, I was now facing the opposite problem where I worried my darks would fade into the black paper. And they do. But that's part of why I gave everything white outlines. It makes everything, light or dark, really pop. Anytime I felt iffy about my darks, I found that adding the outline helped me see them better and make more intentional decisions with them. The sapphires I'm going to ignore, because I wasn't terribly happy when I was making them, and I'm still not. This one is a prime example of I didn't know how to deal with not having the colors I needed, and failing to make a proper plan beforehand really screwed me. In the digital art world, it's not uncommon to see people using pre-made gems in their art because they can be such a hassle to make, or at the very least bringing in a reference you can trace. I didn't have that option here. I learned very quickly that I have a long way to go before I understand the intricacies of how to make a gem look gem-like. The bird, however, is where all of my issues and the lessons I learned from them came together. Plan your piece first. Obviously, I'm still a little disappointed I had to squish the wing to get it to fit on the page, but by having taken the time to plan the composition carefully beforehand, I at least achieved placing the bird in a spot that was pretty decent. No longer was I just creating each piece individually and hoping it all works out. Bringing brightness to a dark canvas. I think this is better seen by the chicory, but I definitely struggled a lot less with getting to the brighter colors I wanted in this piece. Overcoming a lack of options. In my reference photo, the outer feathers of this bird are gray. Guess what? I didn't have a gray colored pencil. That meant I had to make do with what I had. Instead of gray, I layered tans, browns, and white on top of each other to get to my final result. And surprisingly, it does read quite gray. However, this piece also taught me my biggest lesson about color. It's okay to make it up. At first, I was obsessed with color accuracy with my reference photos. But in the absence of the ability to make these colors, I ad-libbed, and I ended up with something I liked a lot better than the reference. And in fact, this is a common thing artists do. They exaggerate or outright make up the colors they see in a piece to bring vibrancy, mood, and color harmony to their pieces. I always sorta knew this, but again, as a digital artist who always had every color available, it became easy to become obsessed with finding the exact color as opposed to finding the best color. If you're a digital artist and you've been finding that while coloring your pieces using reference photos that your colors don't look right, despite the photo of these colors being right in front of you, take a step back and consider if those colors are fighting each other. Maybe a color you took is too saturated for the overall piece and you need to dial it back. Maybe you need to adjust your color choice so one color is more complementary to another. When in doubt, fall back on good old color theory. This realization about using the best color as opposed to the correct color made me very suddenly aware of how often I was seeing it in other people's works. It's something painters have been doing since forever, but it's something that's easy to forget when you're a digital artist with a million options in front of you. Sometimes it takes limiting your options to 48 basic colors and a sheet of black cardstock to make you really think about what you've been doing all this time. I intend to bring these lessons with me into my digital work. I hope to see some improvements in my coloring from here on. So yeah, if you're a digital artist, you should really try doing traditional art from time to time. You may be surprised by what you discover. I have the advantage that I was a pretty heavy traditional artist from a young age, but I've definitely fallen off that bandwagon a few times. But just like riding a bike, certain principles like how to proportionally render something using a reference photo or how to identify areas of shading and highlighting are things I've never unlearned. If you're still at the point where, say, drawing a still life even with just a pencil is hard for you, then you'll want to go down to those basics before worrying about color. Perhaps another time I'll dive into those old still life drawing skills of mine and talk about it here. In any case, I'm gonna pass my page limit if I keep talking, so let's wrap up with the painting of the week. The next brush in my collection I'm testing out is the fan brush. Called that because, well, just look at it. For my research, I was mostly seeing people using the fan brush to make grass, trees, and sometimes water. Which, I'll be honest, kind of annoyed me. I feel like most tutorials I find on brushes tend to just show you how to make foliage. I mean, I get it, natural shapes are easy with brushes, but I do wish I could see some more creative applications in my tutorial hunting. Because of this, I racked my brain for an extended amount of time trying to think about what else I could make with a fan brush to test it. But most of my ideas required setups with other brushes, and I'm still sticking to my training regime of only using one type of brush for each painting, minus the flat brush I use to lay down a base layer on most paintings. Stuck with no workable ideas and running out of time, I caved and decided to lean into what all the tutorials were showing. Or, well, it started as me trying to do something different and ended with me sliding into using the fan brush for its intended purpose. Here's where it ended. Fun fact, when I started this, I thought the red part would be the sky, the floating banks would be clouds, and I'd fill something else in below. But as I progressed with the clouds, they got messier and messier until it became clear I had to pivot. The problem was, this was my first go with the fan brush, and I could really feel my lack of experience with it holding me back. I could never quite get it to do what I wanted it to, and the more I used it, the more the fan brush strands started to clump up and make controlling it even more difficult. I'm definitely going to need a second week of practice with this one. I slapped a lot of layers on paint over top things I didn't like as the painting progressed. I got up, looked at it from a distance, saw more things I didn't like, sat down, and slapped on more paint on repeat until I was at least not annoyed with it. I also tried to keep my color palette very limited for this. In the end, I only broke out 6 colors, and I was very reserved in my color mixing. Most of what you get are the base colors with only the occasional blending where the paints were wet. I did this to test myself. I've been studying color theory in the background. I still feel pretty unsteady with this brush, even after finishing this piece. I have an idea for what week 2's piece will be, but we'll see how it turns out. In any case, that will wrap things up for this week. Tune in next week for the next part of my learning journey. Thanks for watching.